slides. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today with the Recruiters Network and Glassdoor. My organization founded in 2011 that is focused on professional development and continuing education for recruiting professionals through our recruiting conferences, as well as our giving back campaigns to the various communities that we work in with all of our attendees and members of the Recruiters Network. We have several organizations throughout the US and host a variety of events that we right now, obviously with social distancing, are focusing on webinars. We do have several events planned for later this year, and wanted to go through a couple of things before we get started. The first is just some quick housekeeping items. The slides in the recording today will be made available to all of you. And we've also received a significant number of questions from attendees. We're going to try to get through several of those in the beginning, but we do want to save time for live questions as well. And for those of you using Twitter, hashtag is RecNet, and our social handle is @RecruitNetworks. I also wanted to give a special thanks to Glassdoor, our sponsor for today's webinar. Obviously, many of you are very familiar with Glassdoor, the #1 leading job search site and employer review platform globally. Glassdoor has been an amazing sponsor of and partner of the Recruiters Network, and is very focused on giving back to all of you through, again, continuing education opportunities. So thank you to Glassdoor, our sponsor. And I also want to say thank you to all of our speakers that we have today. And I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Kate, and she'll walk through an intro and get us started.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kate. I suffer from law degree. I am also very fortunate to be a board member for the Minnesota Recruiters chapter, which is part of the Recruiters Network. I'm very excited to be your moderator today. So let's turn it right over to our speakers and start with Rachel. Rachel, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, I'm Rachel Neill, the CEO and co-founder of Carex Consulting Group. We provide talent for startups through large size companies in the innovation, PM, and technology spaces. And I am here live from Madison, Wisconsin today.
Allison.
Hi, everybody. I'm Allison. I'm a technical recruiter at Facebook. Been there for about 4 years. Time flies when you're having fun, and I'm excited to be here. I'm sitting out of Walnut Creek, California.
And how about you, Dardis?
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Dardis. I'm calling in here from Minneapolis, Minnesota, Chaska. It's a suburb right outside of Minneapolis. I'm a part of a company called Verseek, and we are a search and consulting firm here in the Twin Cities with multiple functional areas. My role at Verseek is I'm the vice president of our human resources search and consulting function. Thanks for having me, guys.
And Julie.
I am Julie Kukulis. I am from Glassdoor. I head up global talent acquisition at Glassdoor, and I am working from my virtual home office here in Marin County, California.
And Bus?
Yes, I have 2 jobs. In addition to the recruitment work, I'm also the head of global talent acquisition for Pinterest here in the Bay Area.
And do you want to tell us about the next webinar?
Actually, we can do that at the end.
Okay, awesome.
Well,
so things are changing a great deal. COVID-19 has really changed the recruiting landscape because it's kind of put a full hold stop on a lot of sectors in the economy. So let's talk about that a little bit. The recruiting landscape is changing. How have you evolved your approach, Allison?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a technical recruiter, so I'm actively reaching out to candidates. I think a big thing for me is how I'm reaching out, and just starting from the beginning, just making sure that my email is saying like, hope you're doing okay in this unprecedented time. Like, let's talk about how that is. On every single phone call that I have with candidates to prepare them, how's your family? How are you doing? It's a little crazy right now. Let's just build some empathy here. And I think one thing from a tactical perspective is, for me, I'm always prepping candidates. Typically, I'll do them over the phone. Since we've shifted all of our interviews to video conferences, I'll actually jump on a video call with candidates just to make sure that they're comfortable with the platform that we're using for video calls. And again, just build that empathy face-to-face virtually.
Yeah. Rachel, what's changed for you?
Yeah, I think for me, especially meeting with candidates and our partners, I now default to a video meeting. And before, it was either in person or a phone call, and sometimes people would be hesitant to do video. And now I'm seeing a ton of people who actually want to connect via Zoom or Teams or whatever platform that they're using. And it's a great way to build rapport and stay connected.
Okay. What about you, Jason? What's changed for Pinterest?
Yeah, so we have been remote now for 5 weeks, and so I've had a lot of time. It feels like a long time to kind of adopt our approach overall. In the beginning, we obviously moved to video interviews. I think in addition to some of the points already made around making a connection with people, checking with people how they're doing. Some of the things that we've done internally is establishing, FAQs for our recruiters and interviewers and hiring managers to make sure that we have consistent messaging that we're sharing on Pinterest response and how we're managing the pandemic and how we're supporting our employees internally. We've also launched some new pages on our career site, again, kind of tied to our response, but really trying to give people an inside look into Pinterest since they're obviously not on site. And really working with our interview teams to make sure that they're creating as amazing of an experience as they can over video.
Awesome. So with this period of uncertainty, with nearly 10 million people applying for unemployment in the last 2 weeks alone, have you guys experienced any resistance from candidates from, I have a job right now, why would I be considering moving? And what have you done to kind of minimize those concerns? Julie.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll say at Glassdoor, we are now focused on a select group of roles. So we're not as actively recruiting in this market as we were previously. But I would say at Glassdoor, we always think that it's very important to find the right job. And if now is not the right time to leave, we're definitely not pressuring people to leave their job during an uncertain time. That said, I think it'll be ever more important to think about the next company that you choose, and looking at how they treat their employees during a time like this is even more important. So we're definitely, as has been mentioned, we're taking really good care of our employees, and we're trying to relay that to our candidates through our stories.
Awesome. What about you, Rachel? Has anything changed in trying to convince folks?
Yeah, I think a similar approach where we really don't want to pressure people. And we try to be as transparent as possible. So if they're in a good spot and we think professionally that they're in a good spot, we try to relay that message to them. And we're seeing people on both sides of the fence. There are people who are resistant to move because they're like, I have a job, I feel like it's probably safe, I'm going to weather the storm. And then there are people who are not so sure that their company is going to be able to retain them, or they're worried layoffs are coming. So they're actively looking to jump to a new company, or it's sparking them to update their resume and engage with people to see where they might be able to safely land, and whether that's an industry that's less impacted by what we're going through right now. We've obviously seen less in the insurance and the healthcare markets, and even across some of the startup spaces.
Awesome. Well, that leads me to my next question of if we've been treating, how you've been treating people now is really important to what people are looking for. If you've been treating folks really well, then they want to know about that and you want to share that. So how are you all kind of coming up with getting hiring managers, interviewers, and recruiters effectively showcasing your brand and your organization in this time of great uncertainty? Chris? You gotta unmute yourself, my friend.
failed that first test. Darn it. Well, from an employee engagement standpoint, the easy answer is videos on your website and things like that. But there are companies who I feel do that a little bit better than others. I'm sure all the panelists' career websites are perfect in terms of videos, but a couple that stand out to me that I've seen is Ecolab here in Minneapolis does a really good job with showing the employee engagement and even explaining some specific roles through video. And then even there's a small little trucking company in North Dakota called E.W. Wiley, and they really do a good job with building out their employee engagement, and you get a real good sense of what it feels like to be an employee. Obviously, fresh content on your social sites is a great way to get that employment brand out there and share that with individuals. And then finally, we as recruiters, I think hold a really big key if we are in the process of interviewing individuals. I think it's really important now to set expectations when you're talking with client or candidates, especially expectations around timing. And then the follow-up is going to be key. If we have to it's really important now to make sure that you're turning down individuals and following up with them. And then finally, somebody else talked about transparency. That's a real big key right now. If we could lead with empathy and transparency and really admitting that this is a hard time right now and it's hard for everybody, I think that's a real good way to put out your brand.
Well, it's actually for Ecolab. I mean, what they're doing is keeping stuff clean, like literally they are the front line, right? I mean, so that really can be something they can showcase.
Yeah, and they talk a lot on their website just about purpose. And I think that's really key now with every leader. It's helping those individuals that you're leading to recognize what their purpose is in all of this.
Allison, what are you guys doing at Facebook?
Yeah, we're in such an interesting time right now, right? Like Facebook, we're seeing the mission of Facebook being played out in real time, where so many people are now using the many family of apps to connect and share. I think for me personally, I specifically support the team, the data center team that is the backbone of the family of apps. So sharing what the team is doing and how we're keeping all of the services online, as well as sharing, we've been in an interesting spot previously where we've got a lot of stuff to fix and we still do. And keeping it in mind with candidates that we're still fixing these, but the amount of people that are focusing on new efforts as it relates to COVID-19, like the new community support that we launched, different aspects of Messenger, and sharing how internally the teams are focusing on how we can support the greater world that's using the family of apps. Candidates are really resonating to that. And it's been just, again, transparency, as in it's not that easy, and being able to kind of align to that mission. That's really what we're looking for.
How about Pinterest, Jason?
Yeah, so in addition to many of the areas already mentioned, updating career site and content and FAQs that I alluded to earlier, we're really asking our interview teams to share, for example, using our product. How are they using Pinterest at a time like this to stay inspired and motivated, and giving an inside look into how their teams are handling this change and evolving through the moving times. So we've all, most of us has probably had, virtual happy hours and virtual birthday celebrations and moved to virtual new hire onboarding. So those are examples of how we're reinforcing, how we're supporting our employees. And while this might be a challenging time to consider leaving or joining a new organization, making sure that people really understand why Pinterest is that organization that makes sense to move to.
Awesome. Now, if you are an audience member, remember you can use the Q&A function to ask questions yourself. You can go in and type in a question, and depending on how well and fast I can read, we will try to get to your questions. So since we're all doing this over video, and since we're doing all of the interviews over video or telephone screening, all that kind of stuff, besides taking pictures and having virtual backgrounds or reminiscing about vacations we've taken, how are you trying to create those kind of memorable experiences for candidates? What are you doing, Rachel?
So for us, actually, I'm going to talk about one of our partners and what they're actually doing, because it stood out to us. So our partner, Exact Sciences, we work with Katie Everson there, and she's a phenomenal recruiter and leader. And at Exact, they've been doing virtual tours of their lab. And then they've also been really thinking about where the candidates are at in their lives right now. Many people are home with kids or other loved ones and have an interruption. And so they've taken those half-day interview blocks and cut them into smaller chunks of like 1 hour here, 1 hour there to help accommodate. And I think that really sticks with candidates to see kind of how far the company is willing to go to accommodate and fit your schedule. So that's one that I wanted to point out.
Awesome. How about you, Julie?
Yeah, I love that actually. And the breaks are so important as well. And I think one of the things that we realize is that people are not home alone generally. A lot of us are home with children, coworkers that may be pets or partners or children, family members. And so just being really conscious of that and being accepting of noises or interruptions that might happen during the day and having those be sort of the magic moments that we wouldn't get to experience otherwise. So, and again, we also try to just make sure people are as authentic as possible, virtual backgrounds aside, trying to bring your whole self into the interview process.
Yes, awesome. Okay, so not all candidates are professional interviewers, and not all score 10 for showcasing their abilities over video. So what advice do you have for folks who are not used to this from an interviewer perspective? Like if I had my dad, for example, have to do a virtual interview, he would be so anxious about it. He wouldn't hear anything that the person is telling him to his questions. So how are you coaching people through that so that they can be effective and minimize any kind of bias? What do you think, Chris?
So I think it's really powerful if before the interview happens, you actually have a prep meeting with an interviewer or a committee of interviewers. And number one, helping them understand you guys are interviewing this candidate because this is what I saw on a background or on a pre-screen. So helping the interviews understand why you like them, because it's going to be harder to build rapport over video. And so I think acknowledging that and saying that up front in that prep meeting is going to be really important. And then just reminding them to, as much as they can, focus on the content of the answers, not necessarily the nonverbals of the person during the interview. And then secondly is give your interview team tools. Give them interview guides with specific competency-based questions, and then explain what you're looking for in each of those questions. So the recruiter will focus more on that content that's coming out versus if they have their mute button pushed like I did or something like that. And then lastly, I would say in wrapping up the interview process, don't wait for an email from the interviewer that says, hey, let's pass on him, right? Schedule a debrief call afterward and then engage in some dialogue back and forth so you can push against that bias should it pop its head up.
Awesome. Julie, what are you doing with your interviewers?
Yeah, we worked with technical interviewers first because, as Jason said, at Glassdoor, we've also been online for at least a month so far. So we knew that we were going to start doing interviews remotely from the beginning. I think after the first day that we decided we moved all of our interviews virtually. So we worked specifically with some different types of tools that we could do. For systems design was one of the big ones, is just making sure that they had an interactive tool that they could be comfortable with that wasn't a whiteboard, a physical whiteboard that our engineers are used to. So we work with some different programs. I think Chegg was the favorite that they were using to do those types of interviews. But again, we try to keep it as authentic as possible. We use Greenhouse, which is a great partner for us. So we're really good at the scorecards and getting prepped for our interviews already. We sort of have all those muscles worked out. And then it was just a matter of getting comfortable with the video, which I think now at this point, a lot of us, even our children, are comfortable with the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, my kids are on Zoom meetings with their teachers right now. Rachel, what are you doing?
Yeah, so I think there's the candidate prep piece that I've heard mentioned that we try to do. So we try to make sure that there's time to do a video prep with somebody on our team who can really give them honest feedback. But we also look at our partners, so we call our clients partners, and look at the hiring managers and try to prep them as well, because we want them to go into the interviews free of frustrations. It can be distracting if the hiring manager is not comfortable using Zoom or other interview tools or hasn't interviewed remotely before. So we encourage them to do some prep to make sure that they're in the right headspace. And then also any tools or materials that they can send to candidates ahead of time that might help them assess a different skill sets. So whether we send personality tests, I know Seth Block over at CUNA Mutual Group, one of our partners, sends a list of 100 values and has those candidates pick their top 5, and then they can use that as a discussion point during the conversation. And he kind of has worked out, ones that he looks for and ones that good hires have had. So prepping beforehand with hiring managers, sending out different interviewing tools prior to the interview to both the candidate and the interviewer are helpful.
Okay, awesome. So how are you all ensuring interview alignment and calibration remotely? Jason, what are you doing?
Yeah, I would say that, while we're remote, nothing should change, right? You should still have interview calibration meetings at the beginning, at the front end of the process, as well as post-interview or debrief sessions. And in addition to that, having the recruiter take a lead role in that, I think, as I alluded to earlier, making sure that interviewers are all aligned on what is the messaging we're trying to relate during these times, how are we consistently sharing, Pinterest response as an example, how are we answering questions that candidates might have during this time. But I think the most critical piece is nothing changes, right? Making sure that interviewers are aligned on how we've defined success for that role, how we're evaluating candidates, how we're distributing questions. None of that should change.
Okay. Allison, what are you guys doing? Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Jason. I think nothing should change. And if anything, it should be even more high touch with our interviewers, specifically, when we're having these conversations about what we're looking for. Sometimes other people have meetings and, recruiters don't necessarily have them show up all the time. So ensuring that they are attending that meeting, hearing it directly from the hiring manager, figuring out what signal that they're looking for. And then after the interview, I think the onus falls on the recruiter, specifically when, interviewers are submitting their feedback and I see a flag or something that, wasn't discussed or needs a little bit of feedback on the feedback, reaching out within 24 hours and helping them understand the why behind that. And a quick video chat, just to be able to kind of talk live through it. I've felt like it's really helped in the past couple of weeks.
Awesome. Okay, so turning back to more doom and gloom, because so many people have lost their jobs in the last 2 weeks and we only expect more to continue, what advice do you have for recruiting and HR pros who find themselves in that situation? They find themselves looking for another job and network. What do you think, Julie?
Yeah, it's funny, when I was chatting with my team as we started going through this, I realized I think this is the 4th potential downturn, I guess now we can call it a downturn, that I've experienced in my recruiting history. And I always try to think about being really thoughtful in terms of what you want your next role to be. It can be really scary, and sometimes your first instinct is just to find a job versus the right job. And so I think now is a time when you really want to sit back, do your research, think about what you want your next opportunity to be before you start networking and before you start even putting your resume together, because you might want to frame your resume slightly differently depending on the type of role that you want to experience next.
Julie, Rachel, what do you have?
Yeah, I think that people really, to echo off what Julie said, really need to be thoughtful about how they present themselves out there. There's probably going to be more competition in the market, and you really want to find ways that you can stand out. I also encourage people to look at the startup scene because there's a variety of startups that have received funding prior to the downturn that are still going to be hiring, that are still going to be growing. They may even be pre-revenue, and so haven't been impacted as much by what's happening in our world. And it can be a really great time to try something new and be a part of something that's growing and changing.
Awesome. Chris, what do you got?
I would say as I'm thinking about individuals who are maybe looking for work, number one, just recognizing that this is going to be hard, and don't beat yourself up early on if you don't see some early success, because this is, nobody knows how long this is going to last, but we do know that it will end at some point. Secondly, I would say be open to any conversation, whether or not you think you can get value. If you feel like that networking person can do immediate good for you right away, don't turn those sort of conversations down, because you never know the connections that it will lead to. And then thirdly, I would say when it comes to actually applying for a role, don't just blindly apply to a company. Take some time and try to identify if there is a champion within that company that you know of, or that your neighbor knows of, that can put in a good word for you. So finding that internal champion within an organization that you're applying to is going to be really important, just to help you stand out because of the increased competition that was mentioned earlier.
Totally agree. Allison, what do you have?
Yeah, I really enjoy what Julie and Chris said about finding the right role. I always kind of go back to the golden rule, treat others like you would want to be treated. So I think, we're all in this together. We all get it. So making sure that you are building relationships and kind of cultivating those. So, you're looking for a job right now, but in the future, these relationships are going to stand the test of time. So being able to, again, take every conversation, not just say yes to the first role that comes along. I get it. It's really tough. Making sure that we're treating others like we want to be treated.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to say the U word. It is an unprecedented time. So how are you all leading through this at this point in time? I know from my experience, I have spent more time being not only a lawyer, but also being the psychologist of saying it's going to be okay. We will get through this and we can suffer through. What are you all doing? Jason?
Yeah, I think Julie mentioned this is her fourth unfortunate experience in a downturn. I too have been in the recruiting space for quite a while, 25 years this year. I think the last downturn, just to paint a picture, was between 2008 and 2010 during the housing crisis. I was working in a financial services company, so not a great time. So I think what's important about that when leading a team is to remember some people are here for the first time, right? They haven't experienced anything to this degree. And fear of the unknown is very prevalent. And I think a couple of key things that I focus on. Number one is being as transparent as possible, making as many connections with people on an individual basis. Forget one-on-ones for a minute, but check-ins, Slack messages, texts, etc. I think is really critical and really important, because everyone is going through something different personally at these times. There's no prescription for any of this. So I think those are a couple of important things to remember. And then as far as like, how do you lead the team? What do we do with the recruiting team that might see a decline in volumes? Obviously, we all have friends and connections that have had their positions impacted as a result of this. And I think as you look at your recruiting team internally, there's several ways to actually come out of this way stronger and be prepared for what we all hope doesn't take that long to kind of return to what we know as normal prior to all of this. And there's elements around pipelining and research projects and market mapping and redesigning processes and cleaning up your ATS. There's all those kinds of projects that I have been focusing on and would highly recommend. There's also, we're all part of HR, right? So what other HR projects, initiatives, priorities can we partner on? And then there may be opportunities for redeployment internally within your company. At Pinterest, as an example, we have a team that focuses on recruiting influencers and content creators, and sourcing and outreach skills are extremely important in that department. So that's an example of how we can support the company internally as well. I think the last piece is, what can you do externally? So there's organizations that I know have focused their recruiting team externally on helping companies who might be nonprofits or recruiting healthcare workers. So donating their time to help those organizations recruit healthcare workers, in a time of crisis. Or I've also seen other companies lend their recruiters to 15-minute Q&As with their recruiters, whether it be a resume review or mock interview type thing. So I think those are examples of how you can lead through change, but how you can support everyone that is going through this.
This is so important. What are you guys doing, Chris?
Number one, I think Jason said it, just being as transparent as you can within these times, that can help build trust within your team. Somebody on my team last week said, hey, Chris, I think we could really benefit by you helping us see our purpose, because yes, there's been a slowdown in the agency world. And so now all these recruiters that are used to recruiting and selling and things like that, if they're not doing that, what purpose are they bringing? And so just recognizing that as a recruiter, it's your responsibility to build connections with people. And so that's the purpose that you build right now, because in a virtual world, everybody's craving that connection. So really pour yourself into building those connections and relationships with people. And then lastly, from an employee engagement definition perspective, my favorite definition is Franklin Covey said that everybody to be engaged, they need to feel like they're a valued member on a winning team that is doing meaningful work. It's hard to feel like a lot of people are on a winning team right now. So as much as a leader as you can be, letting people know that they are a valued member, the work that they're doing is meaningful. And even if we're not winning right now, just understand that little wins that make you feel good is the same good that you feel when you make a placement. So just recognizing that just because you're not necessarily making placements or working on recs, it doesn't mean that you don't have value. And so just celebrating those little successes as we work our way through this is really important as a leader.
Yes, and I love celebrating. How about you, Julie?
Yeah, I think for sure we're doing all of the things that have been mentioned, really, really great things. I think for our TA team specifically, when a lot of our recs got put on pause, we were very thankful that we do so much project-wise in terms of adding value to other members of the team. So we're definitely focusing on our Glassdoor job seekers. There are a lot of them out there these days looking for our advice. So trying to help there, building content and being able to be a resource to them, and then adding value internally as well. I would say our people ops team is right in the middle of our focal cycle, and then they're also managing our COVID mailbox and all of the concerns with our employees, and they're extra busy. As much as we can add value to them and try to take a little bit off their plate is great. What I tried to tell my team is, as I mentioned earlier, I've been through this before, and one of the things I think that people leaders can do during this time is try to keep their high-performing teams intact as much as possible versus letting them all go and then rebuilding, because we are going to start hiring again. We're already hiring again at Glassdoor, but it picks right back up and you become super busy. So as much as you can keep your performing teams intact and excited during this period, then they could just jump right back into it as soon as it's all over again.
Awesome. Okay, so let's move to some of our participant questions. The first one is, I think, really important in that we may have seen a big shift in focus. So what advice do you have for college students who may have just lost their internship but are still looking for employment? How should they connect with recruiters, etc.? Who wants to go first? Raise your hand. I'm going to assume Jason because he's fallen off my screen. Jason, what would you say to a college student?
I would say don't give up. Number one, continue looking. There are, I think, as Rachel alluded to, there are opportunities out there. Obviously, it's very competitive, but there are a lot of organizations continuing with their internship programs and graduate hiring, and rely on resources, whether it be your school's career center. There's networking groups. I've seen on LinkedIn, I've seen multiple posts for people building databases to connect with recruiters and college students, during this time to help them and coach them and mentor them. So I would say look for as many resources as you can find. And I think Allison alluded to this earlier, is really sticking to the golden rule and what's passionate for that individual. And long term, we will come out of this. And while that's easier said than done at times, and the timetables, unfortunately, doesn't feel like we're in control of them, there are still a number of opportunities that are out there. So I would say connect, network, leverage your network as much as possible during these times.
Anyone
Can I take
else?
that one?
Julie.
Can I take that one too? So we have a smaller group of interns, and we've moved to what likely will be a virtual internship program for our students this summer. But we definitely took the hit with some of our interns, intern roles being put on pause. And I have seen this before where there's not enough opportunities for graduating students as there were in the past. I would make a suggestion to piggyback off what Rachel was saying, with lots of great startup opportunities. If you don't have an intern opportunity this summer, maybe partner with some of your friends at school and start to build something, work on a project that you can put on your resume that maybe is even helping during this time, right? Be creative, think of something that's using your skills and can push you forward, because that will still be seen positively by employers in the future.
Awesome. Okay, so we have, Dardis, what do you got?
Well, just a quick one to piggyback on what Jason said about not giving up. Oftentimes, having been involved with internship programs, oftentimes there can be a domino effect, because interns will have 2 internships that they're trying to choose from, and both companies are holding a spot for them. And if they choose one over the other, spots can open up as we get closer to summer. And so if there was an internship that you were close to getting, circle back with that company and see if there's anybody, see if there are any spots that did open up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. Okay, so there've been lots of questions about onboarding, particularly like how do we make sure people feel like they're really coming a part of the team once we've hired and getting them in the door. And so I'm going to answer one part of one question, and then I'm going to turn it over to you guys as to what you've been doing for onboarding. And the question that I'm going to answer has to do with paperwork and the I-9. If you have not Googled USCIS and flexibility and I-9, I highly recommend it, because the I-9 requirement has always been that you need to physically look at the documents. Well, they're saying, okay, we get it. You can't physically look at the documents because they're disease-ridden pieces of paper that might get you sick. So you can look at it over video chats. You can get pictures of it, as long as once we're past this piece, you do look at them at another point. So there's going to be a lot of paperwork. Hopefully some of you might have considered bringing some onboarding tools on to help you with that paperwork piece, but the I-9 has a lot more flexibility in this point. What else are you guys doing out there? Rachel.
So one of the things that's fairly easy is to make sure that you're sending swag and things that an employee might be getting if they came in to work on their first day. It's a great way that you can get their desk set up, make them feel branded by your company. I think you can also use this as part of onboarding when you're doing virtual onboarding sessions. Make sure that you have some of your company branding in the back. It makes it feel a little bit more like a company and less like 2 individuals who are just chatting over Zoom. So we see t-shirts, backpacks, pens, all that good stuff out.
Awesome.
We've also heard of companies that are setting up buddy networks with onboarding new hires. So rather than just consistently having your daily check-in with your hiring manager, the person that you're reporting to, find a buddy or two for them to connect with.
Awesome. Allison, what are you doing?
Yeah, I can answer Tim's question about doing things differently to ensure the new hires cross the threshold. I don't know that it's doing things differently, but I think, again, like that transparency, where I'm super thankful that we have a large team that's working on this onboarding. So we are doing virtual onboarding, but it's been shifting and changing week over week. So for the candidates that I'm hiring that are going to be starting within a month, letting them know, hey, I'll follow up on Wednesday afternoon and let you know what the most recent details are. And jumping on the video call with them, having the hiring managers, the team reach out. I've encouraged my hiring managers to kind of incorporate them in ways that they can do like a happy hour beforehand or just kind of a check-in, just to, again, that high touch approach, especially for those that are, it's really uncertain times, taking the time to really help them understand what this looks like on their end.
Awesome. Anybody else that want to step in on that onboarding piece? Okay. Are you finding that hiring managers are hesitant to make decisions right now? Julie?
We shut that down early on. So we did have
Okay.
a couple of hiring managers, a couple of key hiring managers say that, you know, they're going to do most of their interviews, but they probably won't be able to go all the way on certain roles without seeing people face to face. And our leadership was wonderful at Glassdoor and said, no, that's not going to be the case. We are business as usual. Everyone's over video. We can do it.
Awesome.
I would agree with Julie, and also adds on the flip side, some managers actually moving a little bit quicker, knowing that headcount is at a premium. And for those that are committed to hiring, obviously we're investing resources from a recruiting standpoint. You know, we're putting our employer brand at stake, our reputation. And if we're actively recruiting for a role, we're going to move through that process just as we would have previously.
Awesome. Okay, so from an anonymous attendee, this is kind of a fun question. Should people still dress up for interviews? I mean, party on the top, business on the top, party on the bottom. What are you thinking? Go, Rachel.
Yes, I feel like this is not an opportunity to wear pajamas or your holy favorite shirt to an interview. I tell both hiring managers and candidates to dress how you normally would dress for an in-person meeting. And then the other piece that they need to think about is when they're Zooming, making sure that they're in a professional setting. There are often times where you're with your colleagues and you know them, and it's okay that you've got trash, I think we heard before this conference started, in the back, or piles of dirty laundry or things like that. But on an interview, people don't want to see that. So make sure that you're in a space that represents kind of the image that you want to portray, both as a hiring manager and as a candidate.
Just to piggyback off that, you can be in any location and put on a virtual background and no one will know where you are. So if you're in your bedroom and that's your only place and there's a bed behind you, just choose a nice virtual background like I have here and no one will know.
You mean my messy kitchen isn't going to really seal the deal for my job? Dardis?
This is the first time I've had a collared shirt on in about 2 weeks. So I dressed interview. And yeah, and I would say, yeah, if you're gonna, if you're entering into an interview, you make sure that how you dress, that they take notice because you overdressed versus underdressed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what tools are you guys using to do interviews? I mean, we're using Zoom now, Google Hangouts. What else have you been using?
We're using Teams on Office 365.
Okay.
And yeah, it's pretty similar functionality. But what I found is, yeah, they're all very intuitive. So if you've been afraid to try different different tools, don't be afraid. Just give it a whirl and see what you think. See which one you like best.
Molly has a question about Zoom being free for employers who do interviews. I think there is some, but Zoom overall is relatively cost effective. So I really like it. I'm not going to lie. I have been Zoom bombed with some porn. It made for a very interesting webinar. But it is quite something. It is a nice tool. So you've been seeing a lot of recruiters being laid off. If you're employed, should you be exploring other options just in case, or trusting your employer? And if you have been laid off, what advice do you guys have for those folks?
Network. I think Jason said it earlier. Network, and maybe Chris as well, is the biggest thing to do. It is scary sometimes when the market gets flooded and you're the one who's looking last. But if you feel comfortable and confident in your job, I wouldn't say jump ship just out of fear, but always be thinking about your next role and what your next play is going to be, and make sure you're networked with the right people, no matter what is going on in the economy.
I'm gonna do a quick plug. Jason didn't pay me for this, but I think this is what's great about the Recruiters Network, right? Like, it's in so many different areas. You can connect with so many different people. I personally am always talking to other recruiters, just because, you know, I don't know what my day is going to look like tomorrow. So I just really always abide by the networking piece, what everybody said. And I think these types of groups that we have for recruiters, there's been a new Facebook groups that popped up for resume reviews. So if you're a job seeker, please go there. I just, like, I'm always going to err on the side of building relationships. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? And I think we're seeing that in real time.
And Kate, just to add in, the first part of that question was really around, you know, should you trust your employer? Obviously, we can't, you know, give you that advice. I would say trust your gut, but really understanding how your company is responding to any potential business challenges as a result of COVID-19, and, you know, how the company is managing through that. You know, what impacts does that have from a customer retention or customer acquisition or revenue profitability standpoint, and obviously make the best educated guess you can for yourself. There certainly obviously isn't a one size fits all. You know, we probably all have unfortunately seen stories online the last couple of weeks of how some companies have handled this and how employees have been treated. And, you know, if you find yourself in that type of situation, I think you will know better than we will, you know, how concerned you should be. And really asking tough questions of your leadership. You know, they owe it to you to share how the company is preparing for this, both short-term and long-term. So that would be an additional piece that I would mention.
Awesome. So we have switched very quickly to having people work from home. And for a lot of managers, that's been a difficult head switch for them to say, oh, well, how do I know they're not, you know, they're actually working if they're not in their office? But the same thing can be true for onboarding. How are we making sure that they are doing a good job, they're getting the training they need if they're not in our offices? So how have you guys helped explain that and teach hiring managers and managers how that works? What have you done? Radio silence from our panelists.
I'm happy to jump in. I mean, I can give you a personal example that's real time. We recently hired a new head of business recruiting. She started yesterday, actually. So I would say, you know, while we typically have onboarding plans, you know, in addition to new hire orientation, what are the pieces that the manager owns, make sure there's accountability there. But we have a, you know, very well thought out approach to how we are onboarding her, specifically in supplementing the new hire orientation sessions with a ton of touch points and one-on-one meetings and check-ins, et cetera. So all, you know, having all of that mapped out. And I think someone alluded to earlier, a buddy program, I think is probably as important, if not more important now, is another element to make sure that new employees are getting what they deserve as they you know, make that change and join a new organization.
Awesome.
I think it's really important to set expectations as well. So when you're talking with a new hire employee, let them know what can be expected. For instance, sometimes it takes a long time to get your laptop set up or access to certain systems. If you just let them know that ahead of time, the reaction is usually a lot less severe. What we do when we are placing candidates at our client companies, we are sending a lot of our clients a onboarding checklist to help us set expectations for that incoming contractor.
Awesome. So as we get through this economic change, there has been some positions that we've put on hold or that we've pressed pause on that have active candidates in them. What kind of messaging have you been giving to those candidates about what to do in that particular situation, or what your intent and your plan is? And I'm going to pick on you, Rachel.
So I think it goes back to the transparency piece again. Being open and honest with what we're seeing. And in this time, understanding that more than ever, people are going to be confused. They're going to want to know what's going on. They've got a job on the line potentially. So following up a little bit more frequently with both the hiring manager or our partner to check in and see how things are progressing. And also with the candidate, understanding that, you know, every day that goes by that they don't hear something can be anxiety causing, or, you know, making sure that we're giving them timelines and, you know, things that they can look forward to on the calendar to say, hey, we're going to check in on this date and we'll have more information, no updates, things like that.
Awesome. Anyone else? Okay. So any advice on keeping selected candidates engaged among this uncertainty, especially in the circumstance where they're not assigned a start date for them? I mean, this kind of follows along those same questions. What kind of touch points or talking points have you given to candidates about this, besides being transparent? Anything else?
I just think in that sort of situation, there's no such thing as over communication. So even if it's a check-in at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, every day, I think that's going to be welcomed.
Awesome. Okay, so 2 quick Zoom questions. On the where you see start video, there'll be a little triangle. You can hit that triangle and you can select virtual background. That's how you can get a virtual background. The settings on Zoom to prevent Zoom bombing is make sure when you schedule your meeting, you make the password required, because if you make the password required, folks can't necessarily get into your room. So I can help with those 2 questions. Are there any active Slack channels that would help with networking with other recruiters or talent leaders you can recommend?
None, I can jump in, none that I am personally familiar with, but I know there's several groups, as Allison alluded to, on Facebook that is an example that existed prior to this, and some new ones, both for job seekers and recruiters, or if you're a recruiter who is a job seeker, again, resume review, mock interviews, networking groups, etc. So I have seen both on LinkedIn and Facebook groups. I haven't personally seen anything on Slack.
Yeah. Okay, so we have just 5 minutes left. Do you guys have any wise words that you want to leave folks with?
How about hang in there? We're all in this together through this, and make sure you don't burn any bridges during this time. It's important to keep people close, understand that there's a lot of mental strain happening out there with people having changes of routines and major stressors. So be patient, be kind, and power on.
I agree. I will say, I think it's a particularly unusual time because of the health crisis that's going on related to all of this. And so it's been really wonderful for everyone to come together. And I think many of us are hoping that we can all stay as connected and as close to each other after this is all over as well.
Yes.
I think the other piece I would add, first, Kate, I want to say thank you. for moderating today's discussion, and all of the panelists as well for donating your time and trying to help fellow recruiting and HR professionals through this uncertain time. I think that the piece that I would add is, again, we are all going through this in a very different, different way, and have different family circumstances. So, I mean, just myself as an example, I have team members who might have, screaming children during a one-on-one, where I'm dealing with my 17-year-old who, won't talk to me for 4 days because he's mad because I won't let his girlfriend come over, right? So we all have different stresses in different ways. Unfortunately, my son actually had to get tested a couple weeks ago because he was displaying symptoms. So, there's a lot that people are dealing with, personally, professionally, emotionally, through all of this. And just, being as transparent and as connected as possible during these times, I think are really, really important for all of us.
Absolutely.
Kate, the one thing that I read recently was that the human spirit is stronger than anything that can happen to it. And so, yeah, like Jason said, everybody's going through something. Lead with empathy in this time.
Absolutely. I mean, for folks that I work with, just the speed at which change is going to be required of them. A lot of them are falling into we need to have certain things be certain ways, and it's just not how this is working anymore. And so being kind and caring and trying to be patient with folks, I think, is going to be really key and important. So with that, y'all, I'm going to leave you. As we mentioned earlier, the slides and the recording is likely to be emailed to you. So if you have any other questions, you'll have a lot of contact information there to share. So with that, thank you all so much. Go out there, recruit, wash your hands. I've been touching my face, but I haven't left my house today, so it's okay. Okay. Have a good
Thanks,
day,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.